How exactly do you get an alcoholic or a drug addict to stop using drugs and alcohol? Yeah, that's a good question. When I was growing up, when I was 5 years old, my adoptive father was putting drugs in my food. He was spiking my food with drugs, and the alcohol I kind of took to myself. He was a drug addict primarily. He wasn't an alcoholic. He was just your basic drug addict, drug dealer is what he did. And so I grew up in a household run by a drug dealer that eventually my mom divorced in anyways. But back on the subject, how do you get one to stop? And I think a common characteristic with the drug addicts and alcoholics is blame. So if you're in a relationship with one, they'll blame you. They'll say you're the reason that they're using drugs and alcohol. Or the government, that's the reason they're using drugs and alcohol. Or they shot 30 people, so that's the reason they're using drugs and alcohol. Or they couldn't take a poop this morning, that's why they're using drugs and alcohol. Or I haven't used an alcohol and drugs for a while, maybe I should use them. So that's why they're using drugs and alcohol. There's a million different reasons and a million different rationalizations, but the only way to really get them to quit is to look in the mirror and stop the blame game. I guess if I stereotyped them, I would say that's the most common characteristic, is the blame game. They blame everybody and everything else for their problem, and it's really, really well developed. I mean, all the things that they come up with for blaming for why they're an alcoholic or a drug addict. And I guess I'll start off with my blame. I was raised in a family of alcoholic mom and a drug dealer, drug addict, and I was heavily abused, and so that was a good reason for me to start off. And then I went pretty heavy into it. I was taking alcohol and drugs right around 8 on my own without being spiked, and 10, 12, until like 16, 17, the doctors said, your liver's so messed up. First they said you have some kind of weird disease that we don't know where it came from. Your liver's got a disease to begin with, and your liver is trashed, and so you need to quit. So I went to a treatment center and everything, and I started learning about alcoholism and drug addiction during the treatment center, which is really a good starting point for somebody to cross the bridge when the bridge is open and see their problem, look in the mirror. I mean, sometimes the family can do it, or the wife, or the job, but it doesn't always do it. I mean, people lose their jobs and quit their families and everything, and they pursue their addiction. So if you can get them into treatment, you can get them to look at themselves and get them into treatment, they'll at least get some dry time, some sober time, which is a requirement. I mean, they have to have enough of time off of the stuff to be able to look in the mirror, to be able to see clearly, because their vision is distorted from the drug and alcohol abuse, so they can't see clearly. So you need to buy them time, a certain amount of time off of everything, so that their vision can improve. Now, some people say that they should just stop abruptly, and in the case of an alcoholic that's cellularly addicted and with some drugs, that can kill them. For them to abruptly stop drugs and alcohol without tapering off can kill them. And I've known people and known of people that have died this way. So depending on how heavily addicted they are, that that will depend, and usually you should use a doctor, professional treatment counselor that specializes in that. So you get them to look in the mirror and everything, and then there's lots of different programs, and this is kind of a controversial thing because I've met tons of drug addicts and alcoholics in my life that have quit for a number of years. Like, I've met people that just quit for 16 years. They don't go to meetings. They don't do anything other than they just stop. They don't go to church or anything like that. I've met other people that go to church and that works for them, and they do their church thing or their Buddhist thing or religious thing or whatever. I've met other people that they become sex addicts, so they start screwing everything in sight, and that works for them, and that keeps them off the drugs and alcohol. So I think you can't really stereotype what's going to work for everybody. I mean, I've tried Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's helped me out immensely. I've gotten 3 years, I've gotten 5 years. The longest I ever got sober was 6 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I always ran into a major problem with people in AA, and that was they said that it's a moral issue, and that because of all the bad things that you did to other people, it's why you're drinking and taking drugs and why you're an alcoholic. It's because you're a bad person. And I totally disagree with this, because I never really did bad things to other people other than myself. I mean, I would say that I have done more bad things to myself than I've ever done to any human being. I mean, if someone else did the horrible things that I've done to myself through my self-abuse and my alcohol abuse, I would have them killed, or I would kill them myself, which I've been doing a pretty good job of doing. But I'm sober today, and that's a choice of, I decided this morning that I wasn't going to use drugs and alcohol, and that wasn't because I couldn't get them, and that wasn't because I didn't have the money to be able to afford them, or the connections or any of that. I decided that I just didn't want to do that with my life today. And also, I have a goal. I think that's an important goal, having something that you really want to do in life that you haven't been able to achieve because your alcoholism or your drug addiction got in the way. So an important goal is a good factor. But as far as Alcoholics Anonymous goes, and Narcotics Anonymous and all that, I mean, there's no guarantees. I've met people with 12 years sober that have blown their brains out. They were going to go drinking, instead they blew their brains out. Then his daughter, she committed suicide. I mean, the stories go on. And I've known other people that were in those programs that stayed sober. So they aren't the end-all be-all, but they do help a lot of people, but they don't have a 100% success rate. They have like a 30% success rate. And probably even less than that, because you consider all the people that relapse, that do not stay sober and clean. But one thing really good I can say about Alcoholics Anonymous and NA is that I stayed in long enough to break enough of my denial that at least when I relapse, I know that there's a way out, and I know that I'm doing wrong, and I feel twice as guilty as before ever going to those meetings. But it being the only way, I don't know. Is my addiction or my alcoholism, which I'm primarily an alcoholic, I'll talk about genetics later on that one, but my primary reason was genetics. Plain and simple, genetics. And so I'll be talking about genetics next.